All right. Hello, Internet. I am Golden Calf. And today I'll be doing something a little differently. Because recently, when I started making this video, doing the research for this video, I was watching a podcast on One Piece called We Are Reading One Piece. And an interesting question was asked. So I figured, you know what? I will answer it within reason. The question was, how many through and throughs happened within One Piece? And this was asked towards the end of the Fishman Island arc, if I'm remembering correctly. So I figured, you know what? I will go beyond where they were at least in their upload schedule, and I will go all the way through the first 70 volumes of One Piece, or the first 3 box sets of One Piece. And I will tally up all of the definitely and maybes from the story that I've found. Now, obviously, if I missed any, let me know. And if you want to change my definition, let me know. Because after all, if this video does good enough, I will do it again, but for the entire series and with better quality images for the panels that I show. So let's get into this. Oh, by the way, links in the description for the podcast I'm referencing. So first, I shall start with the definition. What do I mean by a through and through? Quite simple. It is an attack that pierces somebody and all the way through and actually hurts them. Right? So, for example, if someone lost an arm, the attack went all the way through them, but it wasn't a piercing attack, right? That would be a dismemberment list, not a through and through list. Also, all of my definitely's are only counting the ones that went through center mass. And I didn't count any devil fruit effects or anything like that. That's its own list later in the thing. Right? This also excludes devil fruit prevented injuries, which is at least 20 panels of someone, almost all the time it's because of a Logia, not being hurt by an attack that goes through them. Which, by the way, I said that's the number of panels, because there's at least once where Luffy Gatlinged Crocodile, for example. I counted that panel once. Because it's not actually damaging him, so I didn't really care. However, it is a fun thing to keep track of as you're going through. And then, also, there were around 30 panels where one or more people were hit with an attack. But it's not clear if it went all the way through them, because either we never see them from behind, or it's just random marine, so why does it matter? Right? So, with that being said, we're going to start with the first, definitely a through and through, which is Zoro's side. Now, this is probably the best place to start because it's a clear example of my rules. It's going through center mass. It's hitting him off to the side of his stomach area. It's not cutting through him, making it a hole in him. Yeah, right. So it's not breaking the skin on the side closer or anything like that. It's just a knife going all the way through his side. And then that is from Volume 2, Chapter 11. The second example we get goes all the way to Volume 9 in Chapter 75, which is a random Navy person being shot by Chew. This is the only one from Arlong Park that we explicitly see go all the way through someone. Then we also go all the way to volume 15. In chapter 136, we see 3 of the arrows that Dalton intentionally got in front of go all the way through him, and we see the tips of the arrows back behind him. So that is 3 through 5 on my list. And I have these numbered so I can tell you totals later. And then finally we get to probably the most impactful through and through in the entire story, because it's the first time we see it happen to Luffy. That's in volume 20, chapter 178. Probably one of the most iconic panels or scenes from the anime. Luffy hanging off of the hook. And it is explicitly a through and through, because Water Luffy springs a leak through that hole. Okay? And then next in volume 21, we have Nami, chapter 190. We have Nami being hit in the shoulder area / upper chest area by Miss Doublefinger through a wall. And we also have in volume 22, chapter 190. No, that's not chapter 190. I will have a correction for that up on the screen. Robin is got by Crocodile's hook. I am now back. It was chapter 203. Alright, now back to the list. Number 9 is Ganfall being stabbed by one of the priests, the guy on the bird that shoots flames out of his mouth. And then that's volume 27, chapter 249. In volume 28, chapter 256, we have Wyper being stabbed by the same guy, but this lance is not on fire that time. And then we have, in volume 31, chapter 288, we have Noland being stabbed by his BFF. Well, soon to be BFF. This was towards the beginning of the romance. Then we have Luffy again in volume 37, chapter 349, being got with the only finger pistol, at least within the first 70 volumes, that goes all the way through someone. And then we go 3 more volumes to volume 40, where we get Paulie being stabbed by those guys that ride the dogs. I forget what they're called. By one of those, as a way to show their threateningness. And then in chapter 395 of volume 41, we have Clover being shot. And this is one of the few that happens with a gun itself. Because it's one of the few that someone's being shot with a gun at an angle you can see behind them, and you can see blood splatter going away from them, which is an indicator that the gun bullet went through. Right? Then we go all the way another 11 volumes later to volume 52. Chapter 509, where Urouge gets got by the person that has the most, at least as of volume 70, through and throughs being done by Kizaru. Because immediately in the same chapter, he gets Hawkins twice. And then the following chapter, chapter 510, he gets Hawkins one more time. And then we get to one of the more interesting ones. Volume 57, Chapter 555. Urouge Jr. is temporarily incapacitated by Gecko Moria by stabbing him with a shadow. And then also in volume 57, chapter 562, towards the end of the volume, we have Whitebeard being stabbed. And one of the more famous panels from Marineford. Then we have volume 58, chapter 567, Luffy getting shot again. Kizaru getting a through and through on somebody. And then in volume 58, in chapter 568, Marco gets hit twice by Kizaru after the shackle is put on him. And then in the next chapter, chapter 569, Marco's got twice more by Kizaru. Then we have Whitebeard in volume 58, chapter 571, being beamed through again by Kizaru, because it's one of his most successful attacks. Also, this is a note that I did not include the panel of all the people hanging off of Whitebeard, because we later see his back, and I'm going to count what we see in his back, because none of it is apparently the wound from Kizaru or Squard, as happened thus far. And then the next through and through on the list, number 27, is Ace. I hope I don't have to even show which one this is. This is chapter 573. Most of you know the name of that chapter because of what happens in it. However, the panel is up, so, you know. And then we have two more going through Whitebeard and the one I told you about, number 28 and 29. In volume 59, chapter 577, we see Whitebeard's back. And in the manga, it only shows two swords coming out of him, going all the way through. So this is another 2 for that list. And then in volume 59, chapter 578, we have Jinbei, right at the beginning of the volume, getting hit by a magma fist that goes all the way through and gives Luffy his iconic scar. And then number 31, we go all the way to Fishman Island now. That was the last through and through of the war for Jinbei. And in volume 64, chapter 631, we see a random fisherman soldier get got. And then, also in volume 64, in the next chapter, 632, Charlie receives a similar attack. And now here's the interesting one. My number 33 and 34 are Neptune, because 2 of them apparently go through center mass, so they definitively are. And that's volume 64 again, chapter 633. And then in chapter 65, you have Vanderdecken being stabbed by a trident in 638. And then in 643, chapter 643, you have Zio being stabbed by Brook. That's the last definitive through and through someone gets stabbed or shot, and we see it go all the way through their center mass. And that is 36 by my count. Now, let's get to the maybes. We're going to start with people's body parts. The first one we have is Nami's hand in Volume 9, Chapter 74. This is the classic moment where she stabs her hand to make it look like she stabbed Usopp, right? Now, I do not have Belmare's listed because you don't see her being shot in the manga. So the next one in the body parts list is Bragi's hands, which is number 2 and 3 on this list. That happens in volume 14, chapter 122. And then you have Nami's ankle, getting hit in the fight against Miss Doublefinger, which, as far as I can tell, wasn't a mirage, in volume 21, chapter 191. And then you have both of Cobra's elbows, also in volume, in the next chapter, actually, chapter 192. And then in chapter 193, you have Nami's foot, right before she finishes off Miss Doublefinger. Then you have Rosho's hand in volume 24, the guy playing cards against Bellamy, who Bellamy accuses of cheating. We see his hand get stabbed in chapter 222. And we skip all the way to our good old buddy Neptune, back in volume 64, where we see that there were some that didn't look like it went through center of mass. I counted 3 total things that went through him. So this is where the third one is, because it looked like it went through his arm. And then finally, my 10th on this list is the heart from volume 70, chapter 694. That is stabbed. So if you agree with all of these, on top of my definitives, you have 46 total. And now we have a more contentious list for me. These are ones I personally wouldn't count. But if you want to, I have them listed out for you. And these are devil fruits or effects that caused an attack that went through someone but isn't necessarily a piercing attack. And the first example I have for this category is Ganfall in volume 29, chapter 274, where he's hit by one of Enel's lightning attacks through the head. And then in volume 30, 2 chapters later, in chapter 276, we have Wyper being hit by, well, a similar attack. It's more fancy, but same idea. Lightning going through him, so it's not necessarily piercing him. I do not have Robin on my list because it's more explicit in the anime. In the manga, it's just right before the attack and her falling down after the attack. Unless I misread it or missed a panel, let me know if I did. But that's why she's not officially on the list. And then we have Khalifa in volume 43, chapter 412, being finished off, pretty sure that was the last attack in their fight, by Nami with the Thunder Lance. In volume 50, chapter 484, we see Frankie being hit by one of the air bursts from Kuma's attacks. I forget what he calls them. Little paw pad attacks. And we see it goes through him and hits things behind him. Volume 57, chapter 560, we see the same thing happen to a new comma. Editor here, I don't know how I didn't catch this until I was editing, but it shows at least 3 people being hit. So if you count this, add at least 2 more, unless you notice more than however many. And then in volume 65, chapter 644, we see Red Hawk, which goes through Horty. We see the fire coming out the other side. And then we have Sanji kicking a random guy on Punk Hazard in chapter 656 in volume 67. So if you count all of those that I said count, that are shown in the manga, you will have your total of 53 if you've said yes to all of these so far. And then finally, the other category I wouldn't count myself necessarily is the animals, which only 3 instances of animals getting a through and through, all 3 of which die, which is the squid. We see that introduces Crocus in volume 12, chapter 102, which gets 3 harpoons through it. And the goldfish in volume 15, chapter 129, that Dory and Broggy kill. And then finally, in volume 66, chapter 654, the really big fish eel thing that they kill. Which, if you said yes to literally everything I listed out, if you think all of them count, you will have a total of 58. If you want to include Belmare and Robin, that will bring you up to 60 total. My personal total that I would go with is 46. Until then, be yourselves.